In Ireland, nothing was allowed to go to waste in the cabins of Irish peasants. All kinds of second-hand garments and rags were used by the poor folk for patching and quilting. Children slept in beds in lofts, cuddled under crudely made scrap quilts that kept them warm directly under the thatch roof. Wendy and I are enjoying making scrap quilts, and fortunately, we don't need to huddle under them just to keep warm.
Well, that's because you've never been to Sheboygan in a blizzard, Elle. You always come in the spring or summer when the weather's great. But this quilt reminds me, with its dark colors, of the quilts that were made in Ireland. And you know what? It's also flannel, so it's really nice and warm.
Ooh, it feels good.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Well, different uses of fabric, texture, and color just change the look and feel of scrap quilts. We have some wonderful examples to show you. There was competition among the Irish housewives as to who could make the most colorful and attractive quilt, and some of them were real works of art. They took flour sacks and scrubbed them, and then they sewed patches to the flour sacks. Well, this is my version of the flour sack quilt. These are reproduction feed sacks with that green as a background, and it looks like it came right from the 30s. Ooh, it's great. Now the technique is similar to the one that we did on the 3 fabric quilt, but actually I think that it's easier because you see in the paste up sheet right in the center of each side is a background square, and then all of these pieces in here are just scraps of fabric. Ooh, it's great. Now this is the finished block right here. You can see the background in the center of the 4 sides, and then beside it this is the B block that just goes ahead and completes that whole look. We took the scraps of strips and we sewed them together in 7 different sets. You can see right here. Then we paired them right sides together. I still have my pins attached to it. Cut them, sewed them into pairs, and put them back together again. It's great. Well, this one isn't finished yet, but boy, I can't wait until I'm done with it.
Elle, this is the scrap quilt that I made. I used scraps from my stash, and you can see my 4 background pieces on each side. And then what I did is I took cotton batting, put it inside, machine quilted it, and washed it to give it that old-fashioned sort of shrunk-up look. Unfortunately, a couple of my fabrics faded. And so now I use a product that retains the color along with my quilt soap, and I get this wonderful look.
That is beautiful. I do like it. Well, everyone loves the look of a postage stamp quilt like this one that Loretta Smith made, but not everyone is willing to sew together 1.5-inch wide strips.
Or 2,000 of them either.
You're right.
So this is our answer to the postage stamp quilt. We call it an easy postage stamp. And if you look closely, you can see that down the center of the chain we have scraps, and then along the outside we have a main color, and it frames this big background square. So much easier to make than the quilt of Loretta's.
And I have the paste up sheet just to show you what it looks like. Now here in the center of the 4 sides are the background squares, and then 3 of the main fabric right around each one of them. Now this is what the strip set looks like. Right here are the 7 sets sewn together for block A. You can see those right along the outside edge, which is beautiful. And then this one is block B, the 2 different strip sets, and then that plain solid strip to fit right in there. Well, the triple Irish chain is very versatile, and the background on the B block is large and it can be embellished.
This triple Irish chain was made by Teresa, and she actually used the 3-color pattern, Elle, and then in the large background square she used the photo transfer method and put her children's pictures on it. I think it works real well.
That is great.
This quilt was made by Mary Beth, And what she did is she used a denim background, so I think it gives it a real nice boy's look. And here's her 4 little squares again, so you can pick out the block A. And she's alternated reds and blues throughout this block, and it really looks great. The last quilt I have to show you today was made by a student of mine, Betty Abba from Sheboygan, and she picked a black background, which is really dynamic. And her scraps are all different colors, purples, teals, and then what she's done is a really lovely free motion quilting pattern in this large background square. Lots of nice contrast, kind of an Amish look, don't you think?
And then jewel tones of scraps in there, it's great. Well, we could play with scraps all day, but we need to finish our 3-color quilt. Irish folklore says every day has 1 hour a wish may be granted, but it's only found by trial and error. Well, my wish is that we get this quilt top sewn together, Wendy.
Well, we have our 9 blocks all laid out, 5 A blocks and 4 B blocks. This is our row 1, row 2, and row 3. We're going to take and flip row 2 onto row 1. Just quickly flip them over here. And then we're going to stack them, keeping our first row on top, Elle. And then you're going to get the job of sewing these together. So I have to pick them up and give them to you.
Ooh, and my wish is not to drop them. Now I see that the seams are all going in the same direction, up and down.
That's right.
Good. And even if they're rectangles, can I sew them together?
They'd still fit as long as you keep those seams in the right direction.
Going in the up and down direction. Okay, so I'm just going to pick up the top 2, and right here we could go ahead, anchor these stitches, do a little back stitching. Now, right here at this seam, ooh, they're both going down. Just match them, huh?
Right.
Okay, so every seam is not going to lock together at this point, huh?
No, not at this point, but when we go to put our rows together, they'll all lock because of the direction that we sewed the blocks.
Ooh, there's nothing to match right here. That's my favorite part right here. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on going right down this edge right here, match up this last point, the same technique, open it, roll it in, and then as soon as 1 block is done, just going to straighten that up, pick up the pair right behind it. Ooh, let's see how I can do this. And just keep on sewing right down. Well, Wendy, as soon as this top is together, then we're going to go ahead and add some framing borders. Now, do you have those ready?
I got them all ready right here. These are the framing borders for the baby quilt, and they are cut 2 1/4 inches wide. If you're making any size larger than the baby quilt, then we need to take a look at this 3-color quilt behind me. The framing borders are 4 inches. And Elle, we need to keep those borders either 2 1/4 or 4 inches depending on the size quilt so that the Seminole border will fit properly.
So this is one quilt that we can't be creative and come up with any different measurement.
Not at this point. When we get to the outside border, then we can do that.
Okay, well that's the best part. Well, I'm nearly down to the end of this row. Got these chained together. Now, as soon as I butt this pair right behind, sew it on, then I'm just going to go back up to the top, open this up, and I'm not going to clip the threads in between. Wendy has the 3rd row stacked up, so all I'm going to do is just flip each one of these pieces right sides together and go down continuously and then across. Then we'll just add those framing borders and we'll be set for the Seminole border.
It's no longer the top of the morning. We've got to get this quilt done.
We do have the quilt top done and it looks great. And this is, after all, Wendy, a quilt in a day. Now we do have our Seminole piecing ready. We sewed together strips, 2 1/4 inch strips with the background, fabric 1, fabric 2, 3, and 4 in rows. And for a baby quilt, you need to have 4 different strips. Now, we went ahead and pressed the seam away from one on one of the strips, and then this one, right sides together to it, we pressed it towards one. Now, the beautiful thing about this is the offsetting of the pairs when we cut them. Take and place the strips right sides together, but in Seminole, it's always offset one step, and so that's why the background strip is up here at the top, and down here, no strip. We'll go ahead and line it up on the straight edge, and then cut these into 2 1/4 inch sections. Boy, it's easy to remember all of the 2 1/4 inch sections that we've done, and I think I'm just going to move it over just a little bit and cut up this whole strip set. Now, Wendy, how many of these do you need for your corners?
You need to set aside 3 for each corner, so a total of 12, Elle.
Okay, so you need to have a total of 12 set together. Great. Well, I'm just going to take these pairs, do some assembly line sewing with them. Go ahead and stack them up. Get them close to your sewing machine. I'll just push that out of the way. Now, the thing about Seminole is that so many on each of the ends, you're just sitting there sewing on nothing. Boy, it's great to match. But anchor them right in there. Make sure that this piece, this is the first one right here. Open it up, look at it, roll it together. Make sure it's lined up. Hold it with your finger. And once you push that through, let me get this lined up right down here. Then once again, down at the end, there's nothing underneath. You're just sewing on nothing. That's the best part. That's how I like to match pieces, Wendy. Nothing to sew on. Now I'm just going to go ahead and butt this pair right behind it and continuously sew pairs together. Now, Wendy, while I do these pairs, would you explain the corners?
Okay, we've already put one piece of Seminole border together, and as you can see, because of the way the strips are staggered, we end up with one corner that's mitered. Unfortunately, the other corner isn't mitered, and we have to make a corner section to fit right in there, and so we have a miter on both ends of our Seminole strip. So that's what these single pieces set aside are for. So the first single piece, we're going to unsew between the background fabric and the fabric number 1. So let's take that apart. And you can see, if you look back on my corner here, this is the piece we are now making.
You're pretty good at unsewing, Wendy.
Yeah, I hope I don't need my glasses. I might. There's our first piece. Now, the second single piece we're going to unsew between fabric 1 and fabric 2. And this is going to come right apart.
Get that in there. I'll tell you what. Why don't we just take a look at these pairs while Wendy unsews that? Because I have pairs sewn together, and now I'm going to just offset the pairs one step so that I can take them and assembly line sew like this, sew the pairs into groups of 4 and just keep those going right through. Now, do you have your unsewing done?
Just about. I picked up this last single piece and I'm unsewing between fabric 2 and fabric 3. And then I'm going to go back and swipe this little background square, and this is what my corner piece is going to look like. 1, 2, 3, 4 rows, and after I sew them together, they're going to make a corner section that looks like this. Then we're going to sew that right on the end. Our seams should butt together, match nicely, and we'll have 2 mitered corners.
That looks good. That looks great. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and continue sewing groups of 4 into groups of 8 until I have 16 sewn together. I need to have 4 of them for the baby quilt, and this is what it actually looks like. All sewn together. Now, are you going to do any marking on this, Wendy? Do we have to do any marking?
Yes, we have to mark our Seminole pieces before we can put them on the quilt. So this is a very important mark. We're going to mark between the background fabric and fabric number 1 right on the seam line, so it would be at the 1/4 inch point. However, we're going to do this on the wrong side of the quilt because that's the side we're eventually going to be sewing the border to the quilt top.
Great. So we'll just finish piecing our Seminole together, and then we'll show you how to add it to your quilt top. We have 4 Seminole borders sewn just like this one with 16 pieces in it and corners sewn on one end. Now you can see by looking at it, the mitered ends, those angles that are at 45 degrees. So these are going to be great corners on this quilt. Now I love the way Wendy pressed this Seminole piece. From the wrong side, she pressed straight in here so that down at this part they lay flat and over, and then right up here there's actually a fold in that piece. I love the way she did it because I usually end up having this little twist right in the middle. This works much better. Now you want to trim these points off at a generous 1/4 of an inch. So just go ahead and take your 6 by 24 inch ruler and line up the 1/4 inch line right along that tip, right along that fabric one, and then just shift it slightly to the right so you have that generous 1/4 of an inch. Because whenever you fold this out, after you sew it and then fold it out, you tend to lose a little bit right in that fold, and it's better to have your seam a little bit more generous instead of just sewing that tip right off. It doesn't work. So just cut these off, just get rid of them. Don't know what to do with those, Wendy. What do you think? Do you have a use for these?
No.
Never. We just get rid of them. Okay, so just keep on going and actually trim this off on both sides. Now, you have one that's all ready to go, Wendy.
I have one Seminole strip that's been all cut, both sides, and I just want to show you how it's going to fit in here at the corner. So what we are going to do next is pin it on. I have marked the center, the midpoint of my border strip, and now I'm going to pin the midpoint of the Seminole border to it. Then, I'm going to pin down here at this end. Remember this dot we put right here on the seam line? We're going to match that up to the dot at the corner. And I'm going to leave my stabilizing pin standing straight up because I want a really good match there. And I'm going to put a straight pin in. Now I'm going to pin the rest of the way. This really went together nicely. You did a good job. Sometimes they're a little bit too long, and you have to kind of ease them in, but this Seminole border strip has really a lot of give. So there's usually not any kind of a problem at this particular point because they go together real nicely. But if for some reason your Seminole was longer than the side of your border, then you have to ease it in. But it usually goes together real nice.
Or you could take a deeper seam in one of these pieces.
You could if they were too big, yeah. You want to help me pin the other end of this?
Yes, I'd love to. Let me see if I can get that stabilizing pin right in there. This is an interesting corner right here. I'm not exactly sure what to line up. Just the pin, huh?
The pin at the dot. It should be a dot to the on the
on
quilt.
both of them.
Yeah.
Dots on both of them. Okay, that's
Now
great.
most people think this border is really hard to sew, but as you can see, it goes together real easily. It just takes a little extra time and making sure everything's cut and sewn real nicely.
Great.
Okay, you're going to sew it?
I'm going to sew this. This is going to be interesting. Now, right at that dot, ooh, I still have tips hanging around here. Get rid of those. Right at the dot, I'm just going to drop my needle right in there. And actually, Wendy, I'm going to be chicken. I don't want to stitch back at that. Ooh, let me see. I think I missed it. Nope, there it is. I don't want to stitch backwards.
Well, if you leave your threads long, then you can just tie them.
Okay, I would prefer to do that.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just going to slip out my pins just a little bit as I come to them because I know that the pins tend to shift the fabric a bit. So you've got that seam, you can just sew right over it, hold that down if you want. This is looking good. So pull it to keep that flat to go right along there. Now, what do you say we check from the other side? That's looking great. Cross point right there. See if I cut off my tips. Ooh, that's pretty good. That's looking fine right there. Okay, now all I need to do, I'm just going to pretend I finished this side already. Let's take a look at the corner over here because this is going to be the last step after we get those other two sides on. Right down here in the corner, we sewed coming into it. We've got a dot right here, and actually if I go ahead and take this and line this up, I can see that by the time that's stitched and pressed, that should lay perfectly flat in there. But you actually sew it just by flipping from the wrong side, starting right here at the dot, and these seams, ooh, they interlock, they just lock right up there. So you can pin those in place, sew those from the dot out to the end. And then from the right side, All you need to do is just press that flat and it's ready to just go on and finish. Well, we're so close to getting this done. When we're finished, will we just do the Irish jig?
Okay, let's.
Have a good time.
So many of our friends have been creative with their triple Irish chains. Barbara chose a dominant fabric touched in gold for her 3-fabric chain, made to fit either a double or queen-size bed. From this dramatic fabric, she pulled a deep burgundy and a navy to contrast with the white background. This planned triple Irish chain has been overall machine quilted in a loop design to give texture and dimension. The navy is repeated in the binding. Remember this lap robe that we looked at earlier? It was the first quilt ever made by Ann Nowak. It has a white background, but the chain is not apparent because of the many prints. With the randomness of the fabrics, you wouldn't even guess it is a strip quilt or that each of the blocks is identical. I particularly like the seminal border in this one, don't you? Remember Mary Beth Maher's quilt for her son? Doesn't it have a wonderful country style? The deep reds mixed with blue checks and stripes contrast with the solid chambray background. Her grid quilting with invisible thread adds to the charm. I know a lot of girls who would also enjoy this quilt. For an even darker background, this lap robe that Betty Abba made comes alive with all of its bright and vibrant colors. Again, there is no apparent chain because of the scrappy nature of these fabrics. With a dark background and lively colors, it almost takes on an Amish feel. Try a dark background quilt sometime. They're exciting. Here's a creamier background. The scrappy look features mostly all dark fabrics and really accents the pattern. The lap robe is a wonderful size to machine quilt yourself. If you have a lot of dark fabric leftovers, consider making a triple Irish chain in darks. Marty also chose a creamy background, but notice that it is a confetti print. Her lap robe size triple Irish chain in soothing earth tones is diagonally machine quilted, adding depth and dimension. The chain is obvious in both the blocks and the seminal border. The machine quilting in the seminal border is down the center of both outside chains. Good job, Marty. Teresa's planned triple Irish chain twin-size quilt has 3 blocks added for extra length. Another variation is a narrower framing border in a dark value rather than the background fabric. She uses the same dark fabric for yet another variation in the seminal border featuring 2 rather than 3 fabrics. Her creamy background is actually a tone-on-tone print. She carried the diagonal machine quilting of the chains right through the background areas for a grid quilting look. Teresa likes to add her personal changes to patterns. Teresa also made this wonderful wall hanging using the photo transfer technique for a really special quilt. The photo of Teresa with her husband Mike, her daughters Melissa and Amber, and their family snapshot come alive in colors captured in the fabrics chosen for the planned chain. Here's a scrappy lap robe that I made. The very light background gives a good contrast to the medium and dark prints. Isn't it surprising that the same method can produce a very defined chain in 3 fabrics, but no visible chain when you make it scrappy? The planned and the scrap versions to this method are like 2 completely different quilts. I know you'll have as much fun as we did trying both. And of course, here's my inspiration quilt. It's always fun to shop for antiques. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
This quilt was made in Donegaltown, Ireland, with all of the beautiful wool tweeds rich in tradition. Quilting Time, which originated in 1860, played a romantic part in Irish history. In November, the calling would make her quilt, all the while envisioning meeting the right man through her efforts. In the spring, neighbors organized a quilting ball, and they made certain to have 2 or 3 eligible young men present. The Collins quilt was displayed at the ball, and she was praised for her needlework skills. Well, everyone pointed out how useful she would be as a wife. Well, 8 times out of 10, lasting relationships were found, thanks to the patchwork quilt. Well, Wendy had to go back to Sheboygan, but we had a great time finishing our Irish chain quilts. I put some wool batting in this one and then did some diagonal line quilting throughout, and oh, it's just so light, to the touch. I love it. Now, my 30s quilt turned out bright and cheerful with all of these pinks and yellows in it. I put a cotton batting in it, and then Cynthia did some cable quilting along the border and a shamrock in all of the bee blocks. Oh, it's just great. Well, may you too find comfort and warmth in the triple Irish chain quilt, showered with the luck of the wee folks and fairies.